This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening, my name is Albena and I'm one of the adult programming librarian for Mercer County Library System. And it is a pleasure to welcome Terry A to Z tonight to our virtual presentation on criminal minds, criminal handwriting. Terry is not new to our programs. She's presented at the Lawrence branch in the past. The program I coordinated was famous love letters, the most famous love letters of the last 300 years, I believe. That was the title, and it was really
good memory.
Yep. Okay, thank you. So this program tonight is a co-sponsorship between the Friends of the Lawrence, West Windsor, and Hopewell Library. So this is a co-sponsored program, and we welcome audience from all the branches and from all over the place, actually. Amelia already addressed the chat. If you have any questions, you can post them, and we're going to go over the chat questions at the end of the presentation, once the presentation is over. And I want to point your attention to some more programs that are coming this month, April. We're going to have on April 29th a virtual tour of Princeton at 1 p.m. This is going to be done by the Princeton Historical Society. And also the same evening, we're going to have a program on wills, probates, and estate planning, 2021 edition. If you want to know more, we have a lot going on. So you can go on our website, www.mcl.org. Under events, you can see all the virtual programs that we're offering, and we also started offering outdoor programs, which is another excitement. I think that's it from me. There is a nice reading list of titles that go together with the presentation that Terry compiled, and I added some library resources, and you will be emailed this reading list a little bit later, so once the presentation is over. So thank you very much, Terry, and we're all excited to hear what you have to say about the criminal handwriting.
Thank you for having me back, Albena. It's wonderful to work with your groups. Your curiosity always makes this very fun, and you're tapping into my passion. My background is I have been a calligrapher. I've created documents for royalty around most of the world, also governments and religious groups. 2 pieces for Queen Elizabeth. I've also done a lot with handwriting analysis from the forensic level as well as personality, of which we're going to be doing both tonight. That's part of matching everything in here. So I am going to try and okay, what happened here? Camera. Okay. Here we go. Let me get this. All right, thank you everyone. Tonight's program is Criminal Minds, Criminal Handwriting. I'm Terry Antonievich, an authority on all things handwritten and a retired calligrapher. But I want to tell you about handwriting. It's brainwriting. You do it subconsciously, so it represents your thought prints, not necessarily all your conscious ones. Think of handwriting as, reading your handwriting as body language. Now, audience, I can't demonstrate, so I'm going to try and verbalize this very well. Take your arms and wrap them around your chest very, very tightly. Then sort of hunch down a little bit. Now imagine someone who's written very, very tiny, and they're trying to minimize themselves as they're writing. What I tried to do is just give you an example of handwriting, body language, and reading the handwriting. So I hope that helps you get a little bit of a better image here. Tonight I'm going to be talking about killers. Some of them will be serial killers. A serial murder is a case where a person kills more than one person in a series of separate incidents. It is not a one time where there's a massive killing. I want you to know that most serial killers do not act on impulse. They're very good planners, usually have very high intelligence. As you're going to hear for a few of our killers, they felt abandonment from a very early age for one reason or another. Some of them often experience violence at home as a child. They are usually very, very charming, ambitious. They're secret keepers. You know that comment, if I tell you my secret, one of us has to die. They're obsessive about their planning in detail, and each killer has a different story. 80% of serial killers are schizoid in personality, denoting that they have a personality type characterized by emotional aloofness, solitary habits. When you look back at some of the high-profile cases that you've seen, you probably notice that this is one of the key things that carries quite frequently from case to case. I also want to point out that there are handwriting traits found in criminal writing, but there's no such thing as criminal writing. And please, 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 after the program is over, don't start thinking about a family member or a good friend or a relative that might have a particular stroke that you see tonight and then be worried that they are criminals or that they're a serial killer. There are 5,000 different traits I look at when I'm looking at handwriting analysis, whether it's forensic or personality, and I stack them. And sometimes I need to eliminate some things because they don't put enough weight into the reading. So don't panic right away and think that you have someone who's a killer. Although if you have something that you're concerned about, you can certainly contact me. There are 3 zones in graphology. And I want you to notice here the upper zone, which is this area, the middle zone, this area. Here's the baseline and the lower zone. Your upper zone is your imagination, your spiritual life, the goals that you set, creativity. The letter F happens to be the one letter that hits all 3 zones. L hits the upper zone. Middle zone, AUMO, this is the sphere of today. This is your actual life as it's going on, your social life. Your lower zone is your sphere of your unconscious.
Aren't moving forward. So I don't know if you realize that.
I'm on these slide is the 3 zones in graphology. Is that showing right now?
Not the one that's showing right now.
Oh, let me escape here. Good. Is this showing? Can you tell me what you see? All right. Do you see all my pre-slides here viewing?
Yes.
But when I go, all right, let me try this one more time for, it says it's connecting. Otherwise, you'll just have an advance of my slides here. Okay, it's loading. We'll give it a couple of seconds. Thank you for letting me know that that was an issue. Folks, this is the first time I'm presenting on the GoToMeeting. I've done Zoom and 5 or 6 other platforms. Okay, it's slowly loading, and if it's 75%, What would be a program without a little bit of a technical challenge here? Okay, does everyone see this? It went back to Criminal Minds, the title slide.
No, we're still seeing your PowerPoint.
Okay. All right, you'll see my advanced slides here. All right, did anyone see this slide before? This slide?
We haven't seen these slides yet.
Okay, I spoke through them already, so I'll start right here. And again, I just mentioned, be careful. Sometimes you can see an isolated trait and be very frightened, and I don't want you to end the program thinking that you have a criminal killer in your family or in your social circle here. So there's no such thing as criminal handwriting, but we do find criminal traits. Here's the slide I was on when we were talking. This is the upper zone, and that's where you'll see all of the ascenders. This is the middle zone, the A-U-M-O. This is your actual life. This is your spiritual future. This is your lower zone, and it's your sphere of unconsciousness. And the figure of the body here helps you correlate what part of the zones go with what part of the writing when I'm talking about it. The baseline is something I'm going to be talking about. You can see where the cursor is going here. That is one part of that we do a lot of reading on also. Criminal handwriting does have patterns. Illegibility in itself is not a crime. We have a lot of professionals who are in a hurry if they are still doing handwriting. Deformed letters often show up. I'll show you some fetal personal pronoun letter I, an abundance of loops in the lower zone that are very long and exaggerated and sometimes warped. Angles, your slant, we know backhand, straight up and down and forward. Backhand is someone who's very, very reserved. Straight up and down is independent. Forward is really reaching out to people. Very, very forward is somebody who has to be in your business. But when you mix them up, there's a lot of mixed emotions in here. The low T-bar crossing is something else I look at for low self-esteem. Crowded spacing. This, along with big spaces in between words, is the inability to relate to others. Heavy pressure in itself is often a sign of energy, but when it's real, real heavy and I read it with other signs and stack the details, that's anger. Margins, the left is your past, the right is your future. Tangled zones. Here, the upper, middle, and lower zones go one zone into the other. Schizoid writing, these are some very good examples of it where their mind is going so quick trying to sort things out, where they're making a graph of everything that we can't read, and where I mentioned before the very, very wide spacing between words. The killer K itself does not indicate a killer. It's usually somebody who can do those zingers, narcissism, very painful types of behaviors, but not necessarily killer. O is the loops in them are indications of lying. The self-deceitful vowel, this can be A and O here, sometimes C. These are your mother sitting in your head going, now Joni, I told you you're not supposed to do that. So that is a conscious vowel. Personal pronoun I in English to date yet, I haven't heard anything from anyone else, but we are the only language that has one letter capitalized for our personal pronoun of ourselves. It can have felon's clause here. It can be printed. This portion here is the mother, the cradle, the father. Father up here, mother down here on a printed. And for those of you who remember their cursive, here we go. That's a little background. Now I'd like to get specifically into some of the cases. I picked some of these cases because I am familiar with them from living in the area. Not all of them, but most of them. I have moved over 35 times in the last 50 places. John Wayne Gacy, I was in Chicago when this occurred. And yeah, I can see you're seeing some click to add text, which doesn't show up on my usual. So you'll be patient with me. John Wayne Gacy. He felt a very, very strange relationship with his father. His father thought that the way of disciplining his child was to do extreme discipline. He was alcoholic, he was abusive, and for his entire life, John Wayne Gacy tried to please his father in spite of the anger that existed between them. He was living in Iowa and got charged with a sex crime. His wife divorced him. He moves to Chicago and decides to start over again. He uses a lot of the fraternal organizations to help raise money and connect with people. He also happens to be a contractor. He used the clown persona to try and reach out to a lot of his different groups. Remember we talked about baseline? Look at how it swings up. At first sight, this is a sign of someone who's very optimistic and very positive. But the upper zone here in the J and the I, which is, and the lower zone here are very, very tall and weak. He has a very heavy patois on his name. You can't even tell it's John. His Y here shows he's very, very independent. He keeps to himself. The entrance stroke into his surname has a harpoon on it. He's angry. And here is that felon's claw on the G. Here's a sample of his writing. He also did handwriting too. I didn't want to put a lot of things here because I wanted to concentrate on a number of different cases. But notice the spacing between here. He does not get along well with others. He also is a very good planner. He has a lot of anger tics in his entryway strokes as you go through here. You can see it on the I, you can see it in the M, the T, the stroke to the T. Notice here as he gets lower, the baseline is up and down. He's going through confused states. He's not sure of himself. There are mixed slants in some of his handwriting. It was and this gives a clue that he was unsure of his sexual identity. When he does go to a right slant in other handwriting samples, he was to such an extreme. It was also showing he was trying to take flight from his past. Gacy killed 33 people. He mostly used his construction business to go to the local bus stop in Chicago and try and pick up young men who were looking for jobs. He buried most of them in his basement. Afterwards, when there was no more room, he was dumping the bodies in the river. He was eventually caught. The house was razed, so it would no longer be a tourist site for people or a memory of all the angry things that went on. Ted Bundy, 1974 to 1978. Ted Bundy was the epitome of charm in a number of ways. He was convicted of 30 murders of women. His childhood, he was raised by his grandparents, and his sister, he learned later, was actually his mother. They were trying to protect the reputation of Ted's mother by not exposing her to an unmarried birth. The father is unknown in Ted Bundy. If you'll notice in this, and on the bigger slides, you can see it more. In this here, he has very, very long lead-in strokes, and on most of them, there are harpoon ticks here. He was extremely angry. These long strokes along with the harpoon tick shows that he held his grudges, his old grudges, very, very long, which built up a lot of anger and made him the dangerous person he was. His fetal PPI here, his personal pronoun I that I'm going around here, father presence is totally absent. His left margin, very, very strong, sinuous line here. However, and this is the past, the lead-in strokes here certainly indicate that he is holding on to a lot of past grievances. His right margin is rather normal. The writing is got very sharp points to the top. He has managed to not really deal with his real feelings. He buries them. The angled arcades are one of the nastiest graphology signs, and they show throughout the whole handwriting. It shows his dishonesty and that he had a very manipulative behavior. His lower zones loops here, if you can see them, they run into the upper zone of the next line. They are very, very overemphasized and show a grotesque sense of sexual identity. He was not a murderer in the typical sense because he didn't do it just to dispose of someone. The women he murdered were surrogates for those he held grudges against. And this was a way of creating resolve for the pain that he built up in his childhood. Now, he also had charm. He was very clever and cunning. During his trial, he knew he was going to be found guilty by the jury. So he jumped out of the courtroom window, and he was recaptured shortly afterwards. Once he was in jail, he lost enough and he was able to climb out through the prison, through the guards' apartments, through a room where it was able to redress in a uniform and walk out the main gate. So again, very, very clever, cunning people. For those of us in this area and remembering 76 through 77, David Berkowitz, son of Sam, he had a lot of abandonment issues also. He was adopted, and his adoptive parents were very, very loving, but he had behavioral issues early in school. He was told his natural mother, died in childbirth. And even in a stint in the army, he had a lot of issues. So when he left, he went looking for his birth mother, who rejected him. Now he really feels abandoned. He had the handwritten notes to the New York Police Department, and Captain Joseph Barilli was a person that Sam, the son of Sam, started directing his notes personally. And that note was profiled to reveal not only the name Son of Sam for the first time, it expressed his disrespect for the police and his intent to keep killing. They were using this note to help profile a killer. Maybe you also remember that there was a rookie cop who decided to go through all the summonses on the cars in that area during the killings. And he happened to find a traffic summons for a Ford Galaxy that had been ticketed at the time of the murders. David killed 6 people, he injured 7, and every time he killed someone, he left more promising notes promising more deaths. He gained wide publicity in the media, and it went worldwide. These drawings are done by David Berkowitz to tell you how he thought of himself. And I think just from the light and dark, the large and the small, you can find some indications about some of the clues of this person's mind. He had a tense handwriting. Most of this is printed. Pressure. When I'm talking about pressure, imagine running your finger on the back side of a page like you were going to read Braille. And if you hardly feel anything, it's a very light pressure. But sometimes people write so heavily, they almost cut through the paper. And that's how strong David's pressure was. He had extreme height differentials in his writing. This is just one of his letters, but it's a good exemplar of all the letters he sent. Notice even in here, very, very large, and it gets smaller. Then it's very, very tight over here. His letters are broken. He had a lot of corrections, very, very exaggerated printed letters. This is a mind of someone who's dealing with a lot of personal intra-conflict. And very, very sad. Jeffrey Dahmer had a period that went quite long. He was also known as the Milwaukee Monster or the Milwaukee Cannibal. Jeffrey Dahmer was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. He was also diagnosed as being schizoid, but he was still legally sane for trial. Some people would have described his background as a child as very idyllic, but those closer to him say his mother was constantly the center of attention for her illnesses. He constantly witnessed fighting and arguing between his parents. And even his first grade teacher wrote on his report card that he was suffering from neglect due to his mother's illness. He committed rape. He killed and dismembered 17 men and boys between this time period. And if we look at the handwriting here, it's a little hard to tell margins because he's working around some pre-typed things here. My guess would be that normally we would go over here when we came to the second and following lines. It was very, very rigid thinking about his past. His fetal PPIs, his personal pronoun I's, I don't know if any are large enough here to show, but they are also missing his father image. He has long, lower levels loops down here. The zones start to become tangled. His lead-in strokes on some of the words here are very, very long. And the E, which is the letter of listening or secrets, all his E's are closed. And that is a sign of someone who can keep secrets very, very well. Another unusual thing, and this is even unusual for most people, putting a period at the end of your name generally says, that's it, I'm finished, discussion closed. He puts it in the middle of his name. And here's where he probably was conflicted about all the different personality disorders that he was dealing with. Very, very difficult. If you want to know more about borderline personality disorder for the layperson, walking on eggshells is an excellent way to understand that a little bit more. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was in the East End of London. It was only for a few months, but it created such a wide amount of terror worldwide. And to this day, it is still one of the #1 cases. It happened in the parish of Whitechapel. He's not the first serial killer, but he's the earliest serial killer with such a high profile. It's well over 120 years now, and he's still the most high-profile killer on record. What is really interesting about Jack the Ripper case is this is one of the first cases by the Metropolitan Police Department in London to use modern technology or directive detection methods and criminal profiling to resolve this case. There are still many theories about it, thousands of books, fiction and nonfiction, plays, operas, comic books, even Patricia Cornwell, one of my favorite authors, released her book on her idea of who the killer was in early 2020 or 2018. This is the oldest surviving offender profile done by police surgeon Thomas Bond. He mentioned that the killer must be a man of solitary habits and subject to periodical attacks of homicide and erotic mania. The killings happened within a 4-block area, very, very small. It was a slum populated by the poor, especially immigrants of Ireland and the Russian Jewish heritage. They were trying to escape inhumane conditions at home and landed in inhumane conditions in Whitehall Chapel. The area was dark, dank, overcrowded, strewn with garbage. It reeked of human waste. There was an abundance of rodents, disease, crime, desperation. And with the increased overcrowding, people started turning to alcoholism, a lot of violence, robbery. There were many, many demonstrations. And it's interesting, this is 120 years ago, and we can still see this in our own daily news. There was anti-Semitism, nativism. The people did not want any more immigrants to come into the country. A lot of social disturbances, severe deprivation, and there were 62 brothels with over 1,200 women working in the trade of sex. The economic rise gave to a lot of tension and the demonstrations, particularly after the 5 canonical victims showed up in this time period. They were Mary Ann Nichols, Ann Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Endowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. Many others were attributed to Jack the Ripper, including other areas of Europe and the US at the time, because these crimes were very notorious. Why does it become predominant at this time? Well, for one thing, newspapers are only a half penny each. We are now talking about the height of the Industrial Revolution, so people are looking for ways to keep up with current events. The tax on newspapers had just been taken away. And with this fear going on, it became the headlines of the paper. Even notice in this particular illustration, Jack the Ripper is always portrayed as someone in a cloak and a top hat, but he's faceless. Sometimes he's also portrayed as a ghost. To this day, Madame Tussaud in her museum does not have a figure representing Jack the Ripper because their policy is not to include figures of unknown identity. The case became so well known mainly because of the extraordinary brutality of the murders and because, as I mentioned, the media treatment of the event. It had unprecedented coverage, which generated sensationalism. Think of O.J. Simpson trial, the Jackson trial, even the trials that are currently going on today. There were over 100 suspects at the time. And at that time, they thought it might be a local resident based on the concentration within the 4-block area. The timing of the killings was always on weekends and holidays. The person may have been regularly employed. This was the first criminal profiling. Employment might have been a butcher for the way the brutality was shown on the bodies. Also, It could have been a doctor who used cultural fear of medicine and science against women. And at that time, medicine is just beginning to come around. There wasn't a lot of trust in doctors. It possibly could have been an aristocrat, and there have been a number of programs that shown some of the very high profile and even the possibility that it could have been one of the princes. And this was because of exploitation of the poor by the rich at the time. Again, well over 100 suspects. Lack of supporting evidence today means modern authors can come up with all kinds of theories, but there's no one alive to defend themselves. Research continues today. There are hundreds of works. There are plays, comic books, fiction, nonfiction. Ripperology is so big that there are groups today still trying to resolve these cases. There were 4 letters, 3 of which were quite important. The Dear Boss letter, the saucy postcard. 2 of these documents were found to be promotional items. Remember, newspapers were out. This is one of the first things that are being done to increase the circulation of particular newspapers. The frenzy was so great to increase the circulation. The letter was thought to be a prank, but what was interesting, it was postmarked September 27, 1888, sent to Scotland Yard, and 2 days later, the letter that made a mention of clipping the next victim's ears was found, and that was Endow's with one of her earlobes severed. The From Hell letter is probably an authentic Jack the Ripper letter. It's called the Hell letter, and it was the most gruesome as it included half of a human kidney. At first, the police thought that it was a note with the kidney, and it was a prank by some medical students. Finally, after some tests on the kidney, it was included that it was from a female. She was about 45 years of age who suffered from Bright's disease. Today we know that as nephritis. It turned out to be Catherine Endow's. She was 46, and at the time of her death, she suffered from alcoholism. The letter was sent to the police 3 days before her death. What's interesting in the handwriting analysis about this, if this is a true Jack the Killer letter as thought, it contains a lot of schizoid features in here, a lot of loopy writing. The letter S here, very, very over embellished, showing his ego, his exploding ego, and he's almost using it like a weapon for to increase his sexual fantasies and desires. These are also trick letters, S and L, and when they're real fancy, they're also indicators of people who lie and people who are con artists. The harpoons in the letter, I'm going to, the Y here is in reverse. It goes back instead of coming to the left. It is very, very long, very, very light, mostly missing on the left. That also indicates sexual trauma early in life, and the size of it would indicate this person suffered quite a bit. There are no left or right margins here. He is hanging on to his past, and he's thoughtless and impulsive by not leaving any kind of margin on the right-hand side. Now, we also have forgeries. In 1991, a photo album shows up with some writings on it, and it's purported to be the diary of Jack the Ripper, which surfaced in Liverpool by a metal scrap dealer called Michael Barrett. Of course, like the Hitler diaries, this item created a lot of frenzy, even having a psychologist jump in and claiming that the style showed the writing similar to that of a sociopath. It was compared to known samples of James Maybrick, who was one of the possible Jack the Ripper suspects at the time of the murders. And he also claimed to be Jack the Ripper, but they could never come up with anything conclusive to charge him. The increased attention eventually caused Michael Barrett to expose the item as a hoax, and he withdrew his confession about it, which just made things more confusing. But here are some things which help show that it was forged. This book was based on forged writings of James Maybrick. Most of the writing was done in one sitting versus, we all know how a diary's done. You spend a little bit of time over many, many times sitting down and writing. Flourishes were added after the original writing to try and make it look more authentic. And for those of you who wonder if you've heard of someone fudging on their IRS taxes, the IRS can even tell if you use the same pen at different times on your taxes. Heads up, I almost see a few of you smiling there. Some of the descriptions in this photo album they do match the crime, but only those that were listed in the newspaper. This is the first time that we know of in modern detection methods that certain details were withheld because so many people started claiming they were Jack the Ripper just for the notoriety. James Maybrick did not exhibit any of the sociopathic behaviors of Jack the Ripper in this writing, and James was dead long before this showed up, so of course he couldn't refute any of the information. In any event, Jack the Ripper was so famous that many other cases, as I mentioned, were often tied to him, but he was even thought to have been in the USA. And we come to the American Jack the Ripper. Yes, I was in Chicago, but I was not in Chicago in the late 1890s. This is the time that the Chicago exhibition is being built. And a man named Hermit Webster Mudgett, who had many aliases, including Dr. Henry Howard Holmes and H. Holmes, comes into Chicago. A little background. Different from the other people we were discussing tonight, this man came from a very well-to-do family in New Hampshire. He had a rather idyllic life, but he tortured animals, and it was even whispered that he caused the death of one of his friends while in New Hampshire. He goes to college in the area, but for 1 year, and all of a sudden he makes a major shift to Michigan University, where he goes for his degree in medicine. And his pranks continued there, only here he gets more serious about things. Here he starts using cadavers to collect insurance money. He also did some very cruel things to the cadavers, as if he was experimenting what he might do to a human being. In the middle picture, this is known as the Murder Castle. It was a building he built with the main floor with stores and his own pharmacy. The second floor was individual rooms that he had planned to rent out, or like a hotel. The third floor was added much later. What's really interesting, when this building was being built, he used the people on their extra time who were working on building the Chicago exhibition to build parts of this building. Clever man. He only kept them for a short time because he never wanted them to know the unusual reasons why he built strange hallways, small rooms, chutes, and a crematorium in the basement. He never paid a penny in wages. He never paid a penny for any supplies. That's a good heads up for things to come. You might know this situation, the book in 2003, The Devil and the White City, but there were many other books, including some graphic novels. There were a number of documentaries, 2004, 2013, the History Channel, the ID Channel in 2017, a three-part series on the murder in the castle, even British documentaries. Some of his murders were thought to be that of Jack the Ripper, as I mentioned. Down in Texas, the South, Chicago, the murders were so gruesome, they thought Jack the Ripper skipped over the pond to us. In spite of living this privileged childhood, Holmes' life of crime began with the various frauds and crime, and he had a very seductive charm. Even if people thought he was a little odd, he was still very, very charming. He comes to Chicago in 1885. He's 3 miles west of the Chicago Exhibition, which is under construction. And after he builds his pharmacy and hotel rooms above, he starts charming visitors that are coming into the city for the exhibition. There were many that came to his hotel. Unfortunately, many guests did not survive his hospitality, again in what was known as the murder castle. Most of his victims were women. He courted many women. He had several wives at the same time installed in different parts of the city who didn't know about each other. He had many, many fiancées along with all the wives. He would court them to work in his pharmacy, or he was just charming. Very clever man. If he was worried that a woman was going to press him into marriage because he already had enough wives, he would tell them that they needed to get ready for a trip. They needed to go on a trip with each other. He would have the women pack up all their crates and baggage, and then he told them he would have somebody pick them up. He would murder them in one of these small rooms, send the bodies down the chute to the crematorium. Because there was so much activity going on with the exhibition, there was whispering going on, but there was too much excitement to really concentrate on him. Once the exhibition started winding down, he was aware of the fact that eyes would be on him some more. So he decides after the World's Fair to leave Chicago and start traveling. He goes to Indiana. He goes in Indiana. He hires a man or connects with a man to be an associate. His name is Benjamin Pitezel. His family was in Philadelphia. He wanted Pitezel to fake his death as a swadeaside in order to collect the insurance money. It was a $10,000 life insurance policy. Jailed at one point for another fraud, Holmes confided to a fellow inmate, a notorious outlaw named Marion Hedgepeth, who knew of Holmes as H.M. Howard, about the life insurance scheme. Hedgepeth later related the information to investigators about the discussion. The authorities didn't hear or realize soon enough that H.M. Howard was Dr. Henry Howard Holmes or Herman Webster Mudgett or any of the other names. He's released from prison before they catch on. H.H. Holmes goes to Pitezel's wife and says her husband died. He had the insurance money that was supposed to come to her. And he says, let me take your 3 children till the insurance money comes. I'll take care of them because that'll be a financial burden for you. He starts heading up towards Ontario, Canada. The widow becomes quite concerned, and she keeps contacting the hotels that he says he's staying at. She never catches up with him. It's always a chase game. They do a parallel run up to Ontario and back. He kills the 3 children in Ontario. He is eventually caught down in Pennsylvania. He was apprehended in November 1894, and during his time in custody, he gives all kinds of wild, fantastic stories to the police. He once admitted to killing 27 people. In fact, the authorities checked out between 20 and 200 deaths attributed to him. He went to trial. He was convicted in 1895 and hung on May 7, 1896. He was then hanged for the Pietetzel murder. He was only hung for one person, but his personality survived so much that I think it was in 2014, somebody said, "Oh, we heard that Mudgett had escaped before he was hung." They dug up his body. His body was still in such good condition. His mustache was still in place. So it confirmed he did not escape. His handwriting shows that he was a very, very well-organized, intelligent person. He thought very highly of himself. The spaces in this particular case, instead of showing, well, he did keep to himself quite a bit, other than charming people to kill them. He was a good planner. His lowercase t indicates he had a high energy and a firmness and conviction of what he was doing. The stem of his T shows that he had excessive imagination and aggressiveness. You think? The T bar was angled down. The left side was high. The right side went downward. This showed he had a very strong will and a need to impose it on others to get his own way. The trial of the century. Even younger people today probably get at least a paragraph of the Lindbergh kidnapping. And I'm going to tease you, the audience, a little bit tonight. I have been reading so much on this, and this is right in our backyard in the Hopewell Valley area. I have come across so much more information and conflicting information that I need to do more research, but I will be doing a future program on Lindbergh, the trial itself. This trial was the equivalent of OJ or George Floyd trials of today, and I'll highlight some of the things here. I'll be careful not to contradict myself too much. This has just been such a fascinating trial, and I'll reveal some things that'll show why it becomes such a conundrum. The key players here, as we know them, were of course Colonel Lindbergh, his child, Charles Lindbergh Jr., his first birthday in this photo, and Bruno Hauptmann, who was a German immigrant who entered this country illegally. Don't hold that against him before you vote him as guilty. This was an extremely high-profile situation. Now, this paper is after the baby is found, a short distance from the house, and it's in the 4th edition here. That's how important it was. This was the window of the 2nd floor of the home in Amwell, just outside of Hopewell. The home had just been built. The Lindberghs had been staying 4 miles away in a rented house while they were building this property. It was very isolated. This is the Flemington Courthouse, which became very famous and launched the Wilentz lawyers' careers. Here's a bigger picture of the house. This is a house down the street a bit, but you can see all the crowds here. And notice here, this is the window from the baby's room where the kidnapper came through, and this is where the ransom note was found with an open window. The event happened somewhere between 8 and 9 p.m. on March 1st, 1932. And of course, the East Amwell area near Hopewell, New Jersey. This is the starting point of the gate for a number of conspiracy stories to still develop, and this is now almost 90 years later, and there are still conspiracy stories. Anne and Charles Lindbergh's oldest son was snatched, and the story caught the undivided attention of the world. Colonel Lindbergh was an absolute hero and adored for the advances he made in aviation, the prizes he won, the research he did to establish routes for airlines, and his work, incidentally, that also helped discover some of the Inca and various civilizations in the high elevations that were covered with a lot of jungle brush. That was a side event. Here on the right is a copy of one of the actual notes. This design with the 3 circles and the 3 holes is an enlargement of this area of the paper. Time allows us to step back. Sometimes we can see things more clearly, whether it's documents, details, reasons for motives, actions that were not available at the moment of the crime. It also happens to allow us to do a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking. Sifting through the volume of material on the kidnapping still leaves many, many questions open about the case. Now, I mentioned that Bruno Hauptmann came to this country from Germany. He was a petty criminal. He was in the war, World War I, with his brother, and saw his brother killed on the field, which seemed to have affected his mental and emotional health. He left the country and came into the U.S. as an illegal immigrant. I'll come back to this. He met Isadora Trollfish, who was also from the Austrian-German area and also a criminal, but a far harder criminal than Hauptmann. They became business partners on some things. Let's go back here. They didn't find, there were so many claims about people who knew details or claimed they were the kidnappers. There were over 200 claims at the time. And I can't imagine what it is like for the police department to sort through and get rid of the things that keep them from following through the true case. Other people inserted themselves into the case. Dr. Conte offered to be a go-between. He was even, the police were suspicious of his behaviors too. The one thing that happened here, the police allowed Lindbergh to be part of the case. In any other case, the family is automatically deemed suspicious until excluded by elimination. Lindbergh inserted himself. He would not allow the FBI to come in. He took over the state police, and if they didn't do what he wanted, he threatened them. He used aquatic airplanes to fly up and down the East Coast to follow up on some of the notes that came to the police department, taking the police people with him. There were many, many things that were done very badly. Also, the scene of the crime was not protected. Not only was Lindbergh and all the police trampling all over it, reporters, seekers of souvenirs, the whole area was trampled. So anything that would have been of value was compromised. It was just a really horrible time for the family. Also note that Anne Morrow, who was the daughter of a very popular ambassador, her sister a few months before had been threatened with kidnap. There was a note that showed up. This was something that was happening a lot for people who thought they could make money very, very quickly and get away with a crime. How does Hauptmann get chosen for this? Hauptmann, right after the kidnapping, Fish decides to go back to go back to Germany. He leaves all of a sudden, and he leaves a box with a wrapped box with Hopman, which he puts in his garage, and he leaves it there for several years. The baby isn't found for a couple of years. He goes out to the garage, he's looking for something, and the box falls, and in it he sees the silver notes, or the gold notes. And the gold notes were going off, we were going off the gold standard at that point, and our president encouraged people to cash in the gold certificates for coins. They used the gold certificates and recorded all the numbers, thinking this would be an easy way to trace the kidnapper. When the box broke open, Hopman saw this money. Fish owed him $7,000. So he thought that he was entitled. He first tried to contact Fish and found out he died 4 months after he returned to Germany. And he felt entitled to reimbursement, so he started using the cash certificates. He used it in a theater to go see a movie, and he used it to pay for gas when he was in Bronx picking up his wife at the bakery she worked at. The gas attendant thought it was very unusual since he thought all the gold certificates were supposed to be turned in, so he noted the driver's plate, the license plate on the note. It was turned into the bank, and the police picked it up and followed up and found out that the note was used by a man named Hopman, and he's pursued. It really didn't pursue anyone else. I'm not going to go through the long line of how they finally decided on Hopman, but it wasn't, in today's terms of being fair and respecting the rights of the accused, it was not done at the time. Osborne and Osborne of Chicago was brought in. They were the premier handwriting experts of the time. The police gave Osborne and Osborne different tracks for Hopman to try writing. They dictated. They didn't have him copy it because they wanted to see if he duplicated the spelling errors and the grammatical errors, what his style of writing looked like, and how he placed certain symbols in the document. Osborne and Osborne could not find anything that would indicate Hopman wrote the note. They saw some similarities, but not enough. However, there were no fewer than 16 different handwriting experts who weighed in. And I think everyone was so anxious to have the kidnapper caught and convicted so that people could feel safe and the country's hero could be vindicated. Here, these circles were thought to be done by a bottleneck that was dipped in ink, and this was thought to be made by a cork that was dipped in ink, and then the 3 dots were holes. When all of the kidnap notes that were collected over time were put together, it was noted that this symbol was in the exact same place on every single paper, which meant that this was made in advance and each paper was written on afterwards. After this pressure, and I don't know if anyone remembers the book, The Preacher and the Choir Singer. There was a very similar case about not preserving the crime scene. Howard Kunz wrote a book about it in 1980s, 1990s. That's an interesting one to show how a criminal scene was not preserved too. Remember I said the first ransom note was found on the nursery windowsill. It was not on the bed. It was nowhere else in the room. The ladder that was found outside the room was not strong enough to carry the weight of a man, much less a man and a baby. The only reason a note might have been left on the windowsill if someone could have used the ladder was that they were so nervous they forgot and they put the letter on the windowsill as they were leaving. Interesting that there were no fingerprints of anyone caring for the baby were to be found in the room. Anne's room was on one side, the nanny's room was on the other side. The family used their well-heeled connections to be involved in finding the baby, and that certainly contributed to more confusion in solving the crime. During the trial, many key things and materials were brought in without a chain of custody, and they were also withheld from the defense. Hopman was kept for hours, being forced to write handwriting samples over and over. He did not pass Osborne and Osborne's inspection. The state police shamed them to making the samples fit the crime. The ransom notes, as I mentioned here, were similar to someone who wrote and spoke in German. The writing has the wide spacing between words representing planning that would have been so necessary for this crime. The patois of the writing, you see some of it very, very heavy here, is the familiar pattern of criminals, especially those anxious about a crime that they are about to commit or have already committed. Defense was not given much evidence. Pre-trial publicity heavily influenced law offices. Even later on, adults showed up claiming that they were the kidnapped baby. Lindbergh was not, he had some pretty cruel tricks that he used to play on the staff. He used to hide the baby in a closet and get the staff to look for several hours. He thought this was humorous. It was quite cruel. So there are so many open questions about this. Hopman's wife claimed to the day of her death that her husband was innocent. And also of note, during the trial, Charles was allowed to sit at the prosecutor's table during the whole trial with the gun he carried in his holster under his jacket. A group approached the governor of the time. His name was Hoffman. They approached with a letter. They were complaining about how the troopers were threatened. They weren't respected. The governor claimed that this was the most bungled case in police history. He reopened it, but it never stopped the death of Hopman. So this one's still talking. I still have a lot of research, and I hope you'll come back with a lot of questions and interest in a future program on this. Okay. Trying to watch the time here. So many more cases here. I'm going to stop. We can always, I'd gladly come back and do things later on. I want to give you time to be able to answer some questions, and I'm going to come back. Okay. Okay. Albina, I'm back here. Okay, the slides. It's okay. Are there any questions here?
No, not at this point. No, I don't see any questions. So in the chat, I see just some questions related to the technical issues in the beginning.
Yes, I'm so sorry about that. I hope you did get to see the slides and help that back up some of the oral things that you heard here. Would anyone have any further questions here? I did have more, the Unabomber. There were so many here. There's so much information. It was really interesting getting into the minds of each of the people. Jodi Arias, the Zodiac Killer.
There is a question, I'm sorry. How does one's handwriting change over the course of their life?
Okay, that's Adam. Adam, as you age, your muscle tone changes and your neural messages through the muscles are they change. So over time, you tend to see the shakiness as for a much older writer. If you write even over, when I do the signature analysis classes, if you write your name 3 times, your name isn't the same. Illness shows up, especially diabetes and Parkinson's, at a time when you used to go to your banker every week and deposit your check. Your teller could tell you had Parkinson's before your doctor did. So health issues show up, lying shows up. I do have books. Albina has a list. Andrea McNichols has a couple of books out on it. That I did give the list to Albina, and she said she was going to post that.
Yeah, we're going to email the list to the participants.
Okay.
Yes, and we also edit some library resources.
And if you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to answer your questions. The most prevalent things, if if you're trying to find out if your family member is a serial killer, I'm sure none of you have anyone in the family, and if it's that serious, please reach out to me before you go to the police. I think the biggest thing you're going to find is lying. The lying, the letter O, if it has the knots on the top of it, and the bigger they are, the bigger the liar they are, that would be the key thing to look for in your family. And certainly killers are liars, but liars in your family aren't always killers. Jonbenet Ramsey, I did have this on the program for tonight. Oh my gosh, is this an accident made to look like a kidnapping may have been the situation. The kidnapping note was 370 words on 3 pages. There were 2 drafts. What made the family suspicious in this is the fact that ransom notes generally aren't practiced. You don't write drafts. They're there, and they're much shorter. This shows that this was somebody that was a planner. The handwriting was also disguised, and that's a little clue I'll give in the handwriting analysis if I'm kindly invited back to do the kidnapping for Lindbergh. Patsy, like Hopman, had to sit for hours to give samples of handwriting, and they wanted to see if there were a lot of patterns, but the similarities did not. There were some similarities, but not enough from a handwriting analyst to make it. It's like trying to finger a robbery suspect or the Hopman experience. It raises more questions than it answers, so it doesn't give you answers to be able to provide evidence. And I also want to be careful that these cases have been so sensationalized already. I want to give you food to think about them, to think for yourself, to look and read. Albina has a really good list for you to read more of these cases. I don't want to add to sensationalism. I just want you to think. And I don't want you to go to bed tonight thinking your family member's a killer because you saw one trait. I just wanted to make you aware of some of the things that are there. And as I said, there's no criminal handwriting. There are traits of criminal activity in handwriting. Did I answer the question enough on Jonbenet Ramsey? That's certainly an open case. We'll probably never truly know. It'll be like the Lindbergh case. You're welcome, Adam. Anything else from anyone? We have time here. Thank you, Adam. I have time. I'm happy to answer, but it has been maybe a long day for you already, so you may want to do some things before the day ends for you.
You probably click on the mic.
That's right there. And
Hi, Claire.
Hi. Do you have a question?
Yeah, can you explain a little bit more about, I want you to be aware of my,
yeah, there he is.
about the past being on the left and the future being on the right? Is that true for anybody?
Yes.
Okay. Exactly. Go ahead.
Again, we have to stack things. The left margin just represents the past. When I stack the other details, are you hanging on because you're very close to family or your mother? I have to look for those details. Are you an antiques collector? Do you love history? Those are some things that can show up in the left margin that are positive. When you have a very, very wide left margin, and it's more to the right, it's showing that people are looking to leave their past behind. Then there's margins that go all over the place, and they have a whole bunch of other indicators. But yes, the left is the past, the future is the right. If you have a very, very wide margin on the right, that's someone who's very, very frightened to move forward. And this is where the personality profiling comes in, and I use it a lot with people who are looking to evaluate potential employees before they do the final hiring.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? The handwriting analysis itself is so fascinating. I've been doing it for a long time, and I am still learning some things.
Bye.
Oh, nice.
I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It was a pleasure and an honor to be with you. Albina, thank you very much for inviting me back. I do appreciate it. And for everyone in support here, if you need to get hold of me, you're free to put that information on the book list, Albina, if you want to pass that out, if they need to get hold of me. I haven't learned how to get my screen back up here with my information. I'm working on it. I'm still trying to learn myself. Thank you, everyone. It's been a
Thank
sincere,
you.
wonderful pleasure. Take care. Be well.
Bye. Thank you.